The gunshot pierced the evening air as Josephine Owens stumbled backward, her pristine white blouse now stained crimson at the shoulder. She hadn't expected Rutherford Pike to react so violently to her refusal, but the gold-mine deed in her reticule was worth more than her dignity, perhaps even her life. Josephine had arrived in Silverstone, Arizona Territory, just 3 weeks prior in the spring of 1879. At 23, she was determined to make something of herself after her father's passing left her with nothing but debts and his geological survey maps. Those maps had led her here, to this dusty frontier town where silver had dried up but gold remained hidden in the hills if you knew where to look. "You'll sign it over, Miss Owens," Pike snarled, his thick mustache twitching as he gestured with his smoking pistol. "One way or another." "I told you, Mr. Pike," Josephine said through gritted teeth, pressing her gloved hand to her bleeding shoulder. "My father's claim is legal and registered with the territorial office." Pike laughed, a harsh sound that made the other patrons of the Silver Dollar Saloon shrink away from the confrontation. "Legal don't mean much out here, Miss Owens, not when I own the sheriff and half the territory." Josephine glanced around desperately. The dozen men scattered throughout the saloon all averted their eyes. Even Madame Louise, the formidable owner of the establishment, had retreated behind the bar, her painted face a mask of practiced indifference. Pike nodded to his 2 henchmen. "Bring her upstairs. We'll persuade her to be reasonable." Rough hands seized her arms, making her cry out as fingers dug into her wound. They dragged her toward the staircase at the rear of the saloon. "Someone help me," Josephine shouted, but her pleas fell on deaf ears. This was Pike's town, and no one dared cross him. In the private room above the saloon, they bound her wrists behind her back with coarse rope that bit into her skin. When she continued to refuse Pike's demands, he stuffed a handkerchief in her mouth and secured it with another strip of cloth tied tightly around her head. "We'll leave you to consider your situation," Pike said, his voice low and threatening. "I'll return at midnight. Either you'll sign the deed, or we'll take you for a ride into the desert. Folks get lost out there all the time." After they left, locking the door behind them, Josephine struggled against her bonds until her wrists were raw. Through the thin floor, she could hear the saloon growing rowdier as the evening wore on. No one was coming to help her. She would have to help herself. Across the territory in the town of Redemption, Colton Zachary loaded his Winchester rifle into the scabbard on his horse. At 30, he had already lived several lifetimes cavalry scout, bounty hunter, and now a drifter seeking something he couldn't name. The telegram in his pocket had drawn him to this God-forsaken corner of the territory. "You sure about this, Colt?" Sheriff Mercer asked, leaning against the hitching post. "Pike's got an army of cutthroats working for him over in Silverstone." Colton adjusted his black Stetson hat. "Edward Owens saved my life during the Apache campaigns. If his daughter sent that telegram asking for help, I owe it to him to at least look into it. You might be riding into more than you bargained for. Word is Pike's found gold in the hills around Silverstone. He's buying up every claim, legitimate or not." "All the more reason to hurry," Colton replied, mounting his chestnut stallion. "Miss Owens sent that telegram 3 days ago. No telling what's happened since then." The 50-mile ride to Silverstone took him through harsh desert terrain, but Colton pushed on, stopping only to rest his horse. By nightfall, he reached the outskirts of the mining town. Lights blazed from the Silver Dollar Saloon, the raucous sounds of piano music and drunken laughter spilling into the street. Colton tethered his horse behind the livery stable and approached the saloon cautiously. Through the windows, he could see a typical Friday night in full swing card games, dancing girls, miners and cowboys drowning the week's hardships in whiskey. What he didn't see was Josephine Owens. Pushing through the batwing doors, Colton surveyed the room. His height gave him advantage, allowing him to scan over the crowd while attracting minimal attention. At the bar, he ordered whiskey from a woman whose elaborate upswept hair and fine dress marked her as the establishment's madam. "Evening, madam," he said quietly. "I'm looking for a young woman." "Josephine Owens. I believe she's new to town." Madame Louise's eyes flickered with recognition, but she quickly masked it. "Can't say I know everyone who passes through, Cowboy. Silverstone sees all types. She would have arrived a few weeks back." "About this tall, auburn hair, green eyes," Colton persisted. "Sounds like half the ladies west of the Mississippi," she replied, sliding his whiskey across the bar. "Will there be anything else?" Colton placed a gold eagle on the counter. "Information's worth more than whiskey in these parts." The madam glanced at the coin, then subtly up toward the ceiling. "Mr. Pike's conducting private business upstairs. I wouldn't recommend interruption." Colton's jaw tightened. "Pike? That would be Rutherford Pike, the very same, owns most of this town and doesn't take kindly to interference." She leaned closer. "If you're smart, you'll drink your whiskey and move along." Instead, Colton downed the drink in one swallow and placed the glass on the counter. Much obliged for the advice. He moved casually through the saloon, assessing the situation. 4 men who carried themselves like hired guns were positioned strategically throughout the room. Pike wasn't taking chances. At a corner table, a high-stakes poker game was underway. One player was losing badly, his face flushed with drink and desperation. Colton recognized the opportunity and approached. "Room for another," the dealer, a thin man with a scar running down his cheek, shrugged. "If you've got the money, you've got a seat." For the next hour, Colton played conservatively, winning small pots while observing the comings and goings in the saloon. Twice, men went upstairs and returned shortly after, speaking in hushed tones to the others. Something was definitely happening up there. Just before midnight, Rutherford Pike descended the staircase, flanked by 2 armed men. The saloon quieted as he crossed to the bar. "Louise, send up a bottle of your best whiskey," Pike commanded. "Our guest has decided to be stubborn." "Yes, Mr. Pike," Madame Louise replied, her face expressionless as she selected a bottle. "And have the papers prepared. One way or another, she'll sign before morning." Pike's voice carried the certainty of a man accustomed to getting his way. Colton knew he had found Josephine Owens, and she was in grave danger. He needed a distraction. As Pike's men collected the whiskey and headed back upstairs, Colton made his move. He slid his remaining chips into the center of the table. "All in," he announced loudly. The other players exchanged glances. The pot had grown substantial. "Call," said the desperate player, pushing forward everything he had. "Too rich for me," another said, folding. The dealer revealed the cards and Colton laid down his hand, a full house, kings over tens. The desperate man cursed loudly, flipping the table in his rage. Cards, chips, and whiskey glasses flew in all directions. As the table crashed onto its side, pandemonium erupted. The desperate player lunged for Colton, and within seconds, the confrontation escalated into a full-blown brawl. Colton ducked a wild swing and maneuvered toward the staircase, using the chaos as cover. Pike's guards had moved to intervene in the fight, leaving the upstairs momentarily unattended. Taking the stairs 2 at a time, Colton reached the 2nd floor and moved silently down the hallway. He heard footsteps behind him. Pike's men had noticed his absence from the brawl. The first door he tried was locked. The second opened to an empty bedroom. At the third he paused, hearing muffled sounds from within. Drawing his Colt revolver, he tried the handle. Locked. Colton stepped back and kicked hard beside the lock. The wood splintered and the door burst open. Inside, Josephine sat bound to a chair, a gag in her mouth, her eyes wide with fear that turned to confusion at the sight of the stranger in the doorway. "Miss Owens?" Colton asked, holstering his gun and moving quickly to her side. "I'm Colton Zachary. Your father was my friend." He removed the gag first, allowing her to breathe freely. "Behind you," she gasped as soon as her mouth was free. Colton spun just as one of Pike's men appeared in the doorway, revolver drawn. Without hesitation, Colton launched himself at the man, tackling him into the hallway. They grappled for the gun, which discharged into the ceiling, sending splinters raining down. Using his superior strength, Colton slammed the man's wrist against the wall until the weapon clattered to the floor. A solid punch rendered the henchman unconscious. Returning to the room, Colton drew his knife and cut Josephine's bonds. "Can you walk? We need to move quickly." She nodded, rubbing her wrists. "My shoulder, I've been shot, but it's just a graze." Colton noticed the bloodstain on her blouse for the first time. "We'll tend to that once we're safe. Right now, we need to get out of here." "Wait," she said, reaching for her reticule on the nearby table. "The deed to my father's claim. It's what Pike wants." Shouts echoed from below as the commotion spread. They had minutes at most before they were surrounded. "Is there another way out?" Colton asked, checking the hallway. "The back stairs lead to the kitchen," Josephine replied, clutching her reticule tightly. They made their way down the narrow back staircase, the sounds of the brawl still ongoing in the main saloon. In the kitchen, a startled Chinese cook looked up from his work, then deliberately turned away, choosing not to see them. Slipping out the back door into the alley, Colton led Josephine to where he had left his horse. "We'll have to ride double," he said, helping her mount despite her injured shoulder. "Once they realize you're gone, they'll check every building in town." Josephine winced as she settled in the saddle. "Where are we going?" "First, away from here," Colton replied, mounting behind her. "Then we'll figure out the rest." They rode out of Silverstone at a gallop, taking the south trail that led deeper into the territory. Behind them, they heard shouts as the alarm was raised, but by then they had disappeared into the darkness of the desert night. After an hour of hard riding, Colton guided his horse off the trail and into a narrow canyon. The moonlight provided just enough illumination to navigate safely. "There's a spring ahead," he said, his voice close to Josephine's ear. "We'll stop there to rest the horse and tend to your wound." The small spring bubbled up from between rocks, creating a shallow pool surrounded by cottonwood trees, a rare oasis in the harsh landscape. Colton helped Josephine dismount, noting how she swayed slightly from exhaustion and pain. "Sit here," he instructed, guiding her to a flat rock. "I need to check that shoulder." From his saddlebags, he retrieved a small medical kit, a necessity for anyone who spent time in the wilderness. "This will sting," he warned as he cleaned the wound with whiskey from his flask. Josephine bit her lip but made no sound as he worked. The bullet had indeed only grazed her, tearing through the outer flesh without penetrating deeply. Still, it needed to be cleaned and bandaged to prevent infection. "You're lucky," Colton said as he applied a clean bandage. "A little to the right, and we'd be having a different conversation." "Thank you," Josephine replied, her voice steadier now. "But how did you find me?" "I sent telegrams to several of my father's associates, but I never expected anyone to actually come." Colton secured the bandage, then sat back on his heels. "Edward Owens pulled me from a burning wagon during an Apache raid in '73. Carried me 3 miles to safety with an arrow in his leg. When his daughter asks for help, I come." In the moonlight, he could see her more clearly now. Despite the ordeal, There was a determination in her green eyes that reminded him of her father. "He spoke of you," she said softly. "The cavalry scout who could read sign better than any Apache. He said if I ever needed help in the territories, you were the man to trust." "Your father was a good judge of character," Colton replied, offering her water from his canteen. "Now, tell me about this claim Pike is so desperate to get his hands on." Josephine took a long drink before answering. "My father was a geologist for the railroad. He spent years mapping these territories. Before he died, he told me about a location he'd found a hidden valley where the creek runs over exposed quartz veins thick with gold. He registered the claim legally, but kept the exact location secret. And the map is in that reticule of yours." She nodded. "Along with the deed and registration papers. Pike somehow learned about it. He's been trying to buy me out since I arrived, but when I refused his final offer today—" She gestured to her injured shoulder. Colton's expression hardened. "Pike's not the type to give up easily. By morning, he'll have men combing every trail out of Silverstone." "What do? We keep moving," he said, rising to his feet. "There's an old friend, a Apache scout named Two Hawks, who has a camp about 15 miles south of here. We'll be safe there while we decide our next move." After allowing his horse a brief rest and drink, they continued their journey through the night. Josephine sat in front of Colton, occasionally leaning back against his chest when fatigue threatened to overwhelm her. "Tell me about yourself, Mr. Zachary," she said, fighting to stay alert as they rode. "What brings a former cavalry scout to this part of the territory?" Colton was silent for a moment. "After the army, I worked as a bounty hunter for a few years. Tracked men who needed finding across 5 territories. It was profitable work, but it takes something from you after a while. And now I guide survey teams and hunting parties when the work comes along. The rest of the time I drift." He adjusted his hold on the reins. "What about you?" "Most Eastern ladies don't venture into these parts alone. Boston became unbearable after Father died," she explained. "The creditors took our home, and the only respectable work available to me was as a companion to wealthy old women or as a governess. Neither appealed." "So you gambled everything on your father's claim." "It wasn't a gamble," Josephine insisted. "I've studied his maps, his notes. The gold is there enough to secure my independence for life." As dawn broke over the desert landscape, they reached a secluded valley where several wickiups stood among the mesquite trees. A thin trail of smoke rose from a cooking fire at the center of the small encampment. A tall, lean man emerged from the largest wickiup, a Winchester rifle held casually in his hands. Despite being in his 50s, Two Hawks moved with the fluid grace of a much younger man. "Colton Zachary," he called out in accented English. "It has been many seasons." "Too many, my friend," Colton replied, dismounting and helping Josephine down. "We need shelter. The woman is injured and we're being pursued." Two Hawks studied Josephine with sharp eyes. "Pike's men, you know of him." "All who live in these mountains know of Pike," the Apache replied. "He sends men to drive us from hunting grounds, poisons water holes to keep us from camps." His gaze returned to Josephine. "Why does he hunt this one?" After Colton explained their situation, Two Hawks nodded thoughtfully. "You will stay. My daughter will tend to the woman's wound. Then we will speak of what must be done." Two Hawks' daughter, Morning Star, was a young woman of perhaps 20 who spoke English as well as her father. She led Josephine to a smaller wickiup and examined her shoulder with gentle but confident hands. "The white man's medicine is good," she commented, inspecting Colton's bandaging. "But I will apply a poultice to draw out the poison and speed healing." While Morning Star tended to Josephine, Colton conferred with Two Hawks by the fire. They spoke in low voices, occasionally glancing toward the horizon. Pike has many men, Two Hawks said. They will search every trail, every water hole. Even here you are not safe for long. We need time, Colton replied. The claim is legal. If we can get to the territorial office in Tucson, we can file a complaint against Pike for attempted murder and theft. Two Hawks shook his head. Pike's influence reaches far. Papers mean little against bullets. Then what do you suggest? Find the gold, the Apache said simply. Stake your claim physically. Once others know of the discovery, Pike cannot act so openly. By midday, Josephine had rested and eaten. The poultice Morning Star applied had reduced the pain in her shoulder considerably. She joined Colton and Two Hawks by the fire, where they were studying her father's map spread on a flat stone. This creek marking, Two Hawks was saying, it shows where three waters meet. I know this place. It lies 2 days' ride from here in the shadow of the tall red cliffs. Josephine leaned closer. My father called it Confluence Valley. He said the geological formation there was unique, a perfect trap for gold deposits over thousands of years. If we can reach it and verify the gold is there, Colton mused, we could bring in other miners, make the claim too public for Pike to simply take by force. A dangerous journey, Two Hawks cautioned. Pike's men will watch the direct paths. You must go the long way through Apache Pass. Josephine looked up sharply. Isn't that still contested territory? The newspapers in Tucson speak of raids. Not by my people, Two Hawks said firmly. But the pass offers protection too narrow for many riders with good places to defend if followed. They spent the remainder of the day preparing for the journey. Two Hawks provided dried meat, medicinal herbs, and extra ammunition for Colton's weapons. Morning Star replaced Josephine's blood-stained blouse with a soft deerskin shirt and gave her a wide-brimmed hat to protect against the sun. As evening approached, Colton checked his horse and the second mount that Two Hawks had provided for Josephine, a small but sturdy pinto mare. We'll leave before dawn, he told her as they sat beside the fire. Try to get some rest. You think we'll make it? Josephine asked, her voice betraying her uncertainty for the first time. Colton looked at her thoughtfully. Your father never doubted himself, not even in the worst situations. He'd want you to have that same confidence. It's difficult to be confident when men are trying to kill you for something that's rightfully yours. That's the territory for you, Colton replied with a grim smile. But yes, I believe we'll make it. Pike may have numbers, but we have better knowledge of the land, thanks to your father's map and Two Hawks. And we have you, Josephine said quietly. Thank you, Mr. Zachary. I would likely be dead or worse if you hadn't come. Colton, he corrected. Out here, formality seems a waste of breath. Colton, she repeated, her lips curving into a smile. Then you must call me Josephine. That night, Josephine slept fitfully in the wickiup she shared with Morning Star. Her dreams were troubled by images of Pike's sneering face and the sensation of being bound, helpless. She woke with a start just before dawn, momentarily disoriented until Morning Star's gentle voice calmed her. The dream spirits bring warnings, the Apache woman said as she helped Josephine dress. But they also bring strength. Listen to both. Outside, Colton had already saddled both horses. Two Hawks stood with him, pointing toward the distant mountains visible in the growing light. Follow the dry creek bed until midday, he was saying. Then turn west at the Standing Rock. The pass lies beyond, between the twin peaks. Josephine secured her reticule inside her saddlebag, then accepted Colton's help in mounting the pinto mare. Despite Morning Star's poultice, her shoulder still ached, but the pain was manageable. Be watchful, Two Hawks said as they prepared to depart. Pike's men move like coyotes, always hunting. We will, Colton assured him. Thank you, old friend, I won't forget this. They rode out as the first rays of sun touched the eastern horizon, keeping to low ground where their silhouettes wouldn't be visible against the skyline. Josephine found that the pinto mare was easy to manage, responding to the slightest pressure of her knees. For several hours they followed the dry creek bed, a natural path that wound through the scrubland. They spoke little, both alert for any sign of pursuit. By midday, they reached the standing rock two hawks had described, a towering monolith of red sandstone that rose dramatically from the desert floor. As they stopped to water the horses from their canteens, Colton studied the landscape ahead. The pass is about 10 miles west. We should reach it by late afternoon. And then, we'll make camp in the pass overnight. It's defensible if Pike's men find our trail. Tomorrow we'll continue to Confluence Valley. They rode west across increasingly rugged terrain. The sparse vegetation of the desert gave way to scattered juniper and pine as they gained elevation. By late afternoon, the Twin Peaks came into view, with the narrow gap of Apache Pass clearly visible between them. "We'll be exposed crossing that open ground," Colton observed, pointing to the mile-wide basin they needed to traverse to reach the pass. "Best to wait until dusk when visibility is poor." They found shelter in a stand of junipers and settled in to wait, giving the horses a chance to rest. Josephine stretched her stiff limbs, wincing slightly as the movement pulled at her wounded shoulder. "How is it?" Colton asked, noticing her discomfort. "Better than yesterday," she assured him. "Morning Star's poultice worked wonders," Colton nodded. "I've seen Apache medicine heal wounds that white doctors would amputate for. 2 hawks once saved my leg with a similar treatment after a rattlesnake bite." "You've lived an eventful life," Josephine observed, accepting the strip of dried beef he offered her. "Not always by choice," he admitted. "After the war, there weren't many options for men with my skills. You fought for the Union, last 2 years, lied about my age to enlist." Colton leaned back against a tree trunk. "Afterward, the frontier seemed the only place where I fit. No questions about your past out here." Josephine studied him curiously. "And what is in your past that you avoid questions about?" For a moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he sighed. "I killed a man in Tennessee. He deserved it. He'd beaten his wife, my sister, to death. But his family owned the county, so I ran." "I'm sorry," Josephine said softly. Colton's expression remained impassive. "It was a long time ago. What about you? What's waiting back east if this gold claim doesn't pan out?" "Nothing," she admitted. "I sold everything to get here. This isn't just about wealth for me, it's about having the freedom to determine my own future." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the basin, they mounted and continued their journey. The fading light made the open ground less dangerous, but Colton still set a quick pace, clearly anxious to reach the safety of the pass before full dark. They were halfway across the basin when Colton suddenly raised his hand, signaling a halt. Josephine pulled her mare to a stop, following his gaze toward the southern ridge. "Riders," he said quietly, 4 of them moving fast. Josephine felt her heart rate quicken. "Pike's men, most likely. They must have picked up our trail." Colton made a quick decision. "We make for the pass now." They urged their horses into a gallop across the remaining open ground. Behind them, shouts carried on the evening air as their pursuers spotted them. The sound of gunfire followed, but at this distance, the shots went wide. The entrance to Apache Pass loomed ahead, a narrow gap between towering rock walls that rose hundreds of feet on either side. Once inside, the pass wound like a snake between the mountains, offering numerous defensive positions. "Keep riding," Colton called as they entered the pass. "There's a widening about a mile in with a spring. We'll make our stand there." The pass was even narrower than it had appeared from a distance, barely wide enough for two horses to ride abreast. The fading daylight barely penetrated between the high walls, plunging them into premature twilight. The sound of hoofbeats echoed behind them, growing louder as Pike's men entered the pass in pursuit. Another shot rang out, the bullet ricocheting off the rock wall to their right with a sharp whine. After several sharp turns, the pass widened into a small box canyon with a freshwater spring bubbling from the base of the cliff. A fallen boulder near the entrance created a natural choke point. "Dismount," Colton ordered, swinging down from his horse. "Get the horses behind those rocks." While Josephine led the animals to safety, Colton positioned himself behind the boulder, rifle ready. The approaching hoofbeats slowed as their pursuers sensed potential danger. "They're being cautious," he said as Josephine joined him, crouching low. "That works in our favor. In this light, they can't be sure how many of us there are or how well we're armed. What do we do? Convince them this position is too costly to take." He handed her his revolver. "Do you know how to use this?" Josephine took the weapon with steady hands. "My father taught me. I'm a fair shot." Colton nodded approvingly. "Good. If anyone gets past me, don't hesitate." The riders had stopped just beyond the bend in the pass. They could hear low voices conferring in the gathering darkness. "Zachary," a voice called out, "we know it's you. Pike's offering $500 for the woman and the deed. Walk away now and you can ride free." "Mighty generous," Colton called back, "but I'll have to decline. Miss Owens is under my protection." "Don't be a fool. There's 4 of us and only one of you. The woman ain't worth dying for." "That's where you're wrong," Colton replied calmly. "And who says I'm alone? Apache Pass got its name for a reason, boys. 2 Hawks and his warriors are mighty protective of their hunting grounds." This bluff was met with silence. The mention of Apache warriors was enough to make even hardened gunmen hesitate. "You're bluffing," the voice finally responded, but with less confidence. "Am I?" Colton fired a shot into the air, the sound echoing dramatically off the canyon walls. From farther up the pass, Josephine heard an answering whoop, startlingly authentic and chillingly close. "What was that?" she whispered. "Trick I learned from 2 Hawks," Colton murmured. "Sound carries strangely in these canyons, makes one man sound like many." They heard urgent discussion among Pike's men, followed by the sound of horses being turned around. "This ain't over, Zachary," the voice called. "Pike wants that claim. We'll be waiting when you come out the other side." Hoofbeats receded as the men retreated, leaving Colton and Josephine alone in the deepening darkness. "Will they really wait at the other end?" Josephine asked. "Possibly, but there are a dozen ways out of these mountains if you know where to look." Colton rose from his position. "We'll rest here tonight and leave before dawn. 2 Hawks showed me a side trail years ago that leads directly to the valley your father mapped. They made camp near the spring, building only the smallest of fires for warmth." Josephine spread her bedroll on a patch of soft sand while Colton arranged his on the opposite side of the fire, respecting her privacy. As they shared a simple meal of jerky and hardtack, Josephine found herself studying Colton in the firelight. His face was weathered from years in the sun, with lines at the corners of his eyes that deepened when he spoke. He wasn't handsome in the conventional way of the Boston gentleman she had known, but there was something compelling about his quiet strength. "You're staring, Miss Owens," Colton observed without looking up from the knife he was sharpening. Josephine felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Josephine," she corrected, "and I was just thinking that my father would have approved of you." "High praise," he replied, the hint of a smile touching his lips. "Edward was a hard man to impress." "Not with people," she countered. "He was an excellent judge of character. It was only in business matters that his judgment sometimes failed him." Colton set aside his knife. Is that how he lost your family's fortune? Partly. He invested heavily in a silver mining operation that turned out to be fraudulent. The swindlers disappeared with the investors' money. Josephine gazed into the fire. It broke something in him. That's when he headed west, determined to make it all back, and instead found gold. Yes, though he never lived to claim it. Her voice softened. He wrote to me about this valley with such excitement, said it would change everything for us. A month later, I received notice of his death, a fever that swept through the survey camp. Colton was quiet for a moment. I'm sorry. Edward was a good man. Yes, he was. Josephine wrapped her blanket tighter around her shoulders as the night air grew cooler. What will happen once we reach the valley? If the gold is there as he believed, we stake your claim properly, then find trustworthy men to help work it. Colton added a small branch to their fire. Pike's power comes from secrecy and intimidation. Once your claim becomes public knowledge with witnesses to its value, he'll find it harder to simply take by force. And afterward, what will you do? Colton's blue eyes met hers across the fire. I hadn't thought that far ahead. Surely you must have plans, dreams of your own, he shrugged. I've been drifting so long, plans seem like a luxury. Everyone should have dreams, Josephine insisted. What about you? Once your claim is secure and producing gold, what then? Josephine considered the question. I'd like to build something lasting. Not just a mining operation, but perhaps a proper town. Somewhere with a school, a hospital, civilization amid the wilderness. Ambitious, Colton observed. My father always said I aimed too high, she admitted with a small smile. But what's the point of dreaming if you don't dream big? The conversation lulled into comfortable silence. Exhaustion from the long day's ride and the tension of their escape was catching up to Josephine. She stifled a yawn. You should sleep, Colton said. I'll take first watch. Despite her fatigue, sleep did not come easily. Her wounded shoulder throbbed, and every sound, the call of a night bird, the rustle of wind through the pass, made her tense. Eventually, she drifted into uneasy slumber. She woke sometime in the night to find Colton gently shaking her shoulder. What is it? She whispered, instantly alert. Nothing to fear, he assured her. But we should move. The moon has set, and this is our best chance to take the side trail unobserved. They packed quickly in the darkness, using only the dim glow of banked coals to see by. Colton led them deeper into the pass, following what seemed to be a game trail that branched off the main route. It was so narrow in places that they had to dismount and lead the horses single file. By the time dawn lightened the eastern sky, they had emerged from the mountains onto a high plateau overlooking a secluded valley. The sight below took Josephine's breath away. A ribbon of water wound through the center of the valley, flanked by cottonwoods and willows. The morning sun caught the stream, making it sparkle like diamonds scattered on velvet. Confluence Valley, Colton said quietly, just as your father described it. Josephine pulled her father's map from her reticule, comparing the drawing to the landscape before them. This is it, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. We found it. They made their way down into the valley via a steep trail that zigzagged along the cliff face. As they reached level ground, Colton dismounted to examine the stream bed. Look here, he said, pointing to the exposed rock along the bank. Quartz veins, heavily mineralized. Josephine knelt beside him, running her fingers over the white stone shot through with yellow streaks. Is it really gold? Colton drew his knife and carefully pried a small section loose, then wet it in the stream. The yellow metal gleamed brightly in the morning light. It's gold, all right. And from the look of these veins, your father wasn't exaggerating. There's a fortune here. Josephine felt tears spring to her eyes. He was right all along. They spent the morning examining the valley, following the creek to where it divided into three smaller tributaries, the confluence that gave the valley its name. Each branch revealed similar quartz deposits rich with gold. "Your father's claim covers the entire valley?" Colton asked as they paused to rest and water the horses. Josephine nodded, showing him the deed. 500 acres centered on the confluence. He was very specific about the boundaries. "Smart man," Colton mused. "This is easily the richest deposit I've seen in the territory. No wonder Pike is so determined to take it." "What do we do now?" "First, we properly mark the claim boundaries according to territorial law," Colton replied. "Then we need to get to Tucson to register our findings and file a complaint against Pike for attempted murder." "That means crossing back through territory Pike controls," Josephine observed. "Yes, but not right away. We'll stay here for a few days, gather enough gold samples to prove the claim's value, and plan our route carefully." They set up camp near the largest of the three streams, in a clearing sheltered by cottonwoods. Colton fashioned crude mining tools from materials at hand, a wooden pan for sluicing gold from the stream bed, picks from branches hardened in fire. By the end of their second day in the valley, they had accumulated a small leather pouch of gold nuggets and dust easily worth several $100s, and tangible proof of the claim's value. As evening fell, they sat beside their campfire, the day's labor having created a comfortable fatigue. Josephine found herself watching Colton as he cleaned his rifle, the methodical movements of his hands, the concentration in his expression. "You've been quiet today," she observed. Colton glanced up. "Just thinking." "About," he hesitated. "About what happens after we secure your claim." "You'll need experienced miners, equipment, protection." "Yes," Josephine agreed. "I suppose I'll need to hire trustworthy men." "I could stay on," Colton said casually, returning his attention to the rifle. "Help you get established." Josephine felt an unexpected warmth spread through her. "I'd like that." Their eyes met across the fire, and something unspoken passed between them. Colton cleared his throat and looked away first. "We should prepare to leave tomorrow," he said. "The longer we stay, the more likely Pike's men will find this place." "Of course," Josephine replied, trying to mask her disappointment at the change of subject. "Which route will we take to Tucson?" "South, through Corazon Canyon. It's longer but less traveled. We can stop at Fort Bowie if needed. The cavalry there will provide escort to Tucson if I explain the situation." The next morning, they packed their belongings and prepared to leave the valley. Josephine took a final look around, trying to memorize every detail of the place that would change her future. "We'll return soon," Colton assured her, sensing her reluctance to leave. "With proper equipment and workers." "I know," she said. "It's just that this place meant so much to my father. Being here makes me feel close to him again." Colton placed a gentle hand on her uninjured shoulder. "He'd be proud of you, Josephine. Not everyone would have had the courage to come west alone and fight for what's rightfully theirs." His words warmed her, as did the rare use of her first name. Since their conversation by the fire the previous night, something had changed between them, a new awareness, a tension that was both uncomfortable and exhilarating. They left the valley by a different route than they had entered, following a game trail that wound through the southern foothills. Colton set a cautious pace, frequently stopping to check for signs of pursuit or ambush. By midday, they had covered several miles without incident. The terrain gradually changed from forested hills to more open country, with scattered mesquite and kala cactus dotting the landscape. "How much farther to Corazon Canyon?" Josephine asked as they paused to rest the horses. "We should reach the entrance by nightfall," Colton replied, scanning the horizon with a practiced eye. "It's a full day's ride through the canyon, then another to Fort Bowie." As they prepared to continue, the distant sound of hoofbeats made them both freeze. Colton quickly led them behind a large boulder, motioning for silence. A group of riders appeared on the ridge they had descended an hour earlier, at least 6 men, led by a figure Josephine recognized with a chill of fear. "Pike," she whispered. Colton nodded grimly. "They must have found our trail somehow. We need to move fast." They mounted quickly and rode west, away from their planned route. The open terrain offered little cover, but Colton led them toward a dry wash that cut across the landscape. "The wash will hide our tracks," he explained as they urged their horses down the steep bank. "We'll follow it as far as we can, then cut south toward the canyon." For hours they rode hard, stopping only when necessary to rest the horses. The sun beat down mercilessly, and Josephine's wounded shoulder ached from the constant motion. Still, the fear of capture drove them onward. By late afternoon, they had reached the foothills that marked the approach to Corazon Canyon. Colton called a brief halt in the shelter of an overhanging rock. "I think we've lost them for now," he said, offering Josephine his canteen. "But they'll keep searching." "Pike isn't a man who gives up easily." "How did they find us?" Josephine wondered, taking a grateful sip of water. "Hard to say. They might have guessed our destination from your father's papers, or perhaps they followed our trail from Apache Pass." Colton's expression was troubled. "The important thing is we have the gold samples and the deed. Once we reach Fort Bowie, we'll have military protection." As they prepared to continue, a rifle shot cracked through the air. The bullet struck the rock above their heads, sending stone splinters flying. "Down!" Colton shouted, dragging Josephine behind the rock as more shots followed. Their horses, startled by the gunfire, bolted despite Colton's attempt to hold them. Within moments, the animals had disappeared around a bend in the trail. "3 riders," Colton said tensely, peering around the edge of their shelter. "Pike's advance scouts. The main group can't be far behind." Josephine clutched her reticule containing the deed and gold samples. "What do we do? We need to reach the canyon on foot." "It's defensible, and we might lose them in the maze of side passages." Colton checked his Winchester. "Can you run?" Josephine nodded, though her shoulder protested at the thought. "Stay low and follow me," he instructed. "When I fire, run for those boulders ahead. Ready." At her nod, Colton leaned out and fired 3 rapid shots toward their attackers. The men ducked for cover, giving Josephine the chance to sprint for the boulders 50 yards away. Colton followed, providing covering fire as he ran. They repeated this leapfrog pattern, moving from cover to cover as they made their way toward the canyon entrance visible in the distance. The pursuers followed cautiously, unwilling to expose themselves to Colton's accurate rifle fire. "They're trying to pin us down until Pike arrives with the main group," Colton said as they sheltered behind a fallen tree. "We need to reach the canyon before that happens." Josephine was breathing hard, her wound throbbing painfully. "How much further?" "Half a mile, maybe less." Colton glanced at her with concern. "Are you all right?" "I'll manage," she assured him, though her face was pale beneath its sun-flushed exterior. They continued their fighting retreat, Colton making every bullet count as he kept their pursuers at bay. The canyon entrance grew closer, a narrow gap between towering red cliffs that promised relative safety. 100 yards from the entrance, disaster struck. As they ran between patches of cover, Josephine stumbled on loose rocks and fell heavily. Colton was at her side instantly, helping her up, but the delay cost them precious seconds. A bullet whined past them, closer than any previous shot. Colton returned fire, his Winchester clicking empty after the shot. "Out of rifle ammunition," he muttered, drawing his revolver. "We make a run for it on 3. 1, 2, before he could say 3, Riders appeared on the ridge behind them, Pike and at least 5 men, cutting off their route to the canyon. "It's over, Zachary," Pike called out, his voice carrying in the still air. "Throw down your weapon." Colton positioned himself in front of Josephine, his revolver steady despite the odds against them. "Stay behind me," he said quietly. "No," she replied, drawing the pistol he had given her in Apache Pass. Together. Pike and his men advanced slowly, confident in their superior numbers. "I'll make this simple," Pike called. "Give me the deed and the gold samples, and I might let you live." "The claim is legally registered," Josephine shouted back. "Kill us, and the territorial authorities will investigate," Pike laughed. "Accidents happen in these parts all the time." 2 prospectors, ambushed by Apache, is tragic, but not unusual. They were trapped, with nowhere to run and no hope of fighting off so many armed men. Josephine felt a strange calm descend over her. If this was to be her end, at least she wouldn't face it alone. "Whatever happens," she said softly to Colton, "I want you to know I'm grateful for everything you've done." Colton's eyes never left Pike and his advancing men. "It's not over yet." As if in answer to his words, a war cry echoed from the canyon entrance. Pike's men turned in alarm as mounted warriors emerged from the gap, Apache riders led by a familiar figure. 2 hawks, Josephine breathed in disbelief. The Apache warriors charged toward Pike's men, who scattered in panic at the unexpected attack. Gunfire erupted as both sides exchanged shots. "Now," Colton grabbed Josephine's hand and they ran toward the canyon, using the confusion as cover. 2 hawks broke away from his warriors to intercept them. "Quickly," he called, gesturing toward the canyon. "My people will hold them off." As they reached the safety of the narrow passage, Josephine looked back to see Pike and his remaining men retreating, pursued by the Apaches. Within minutes, the sounds of conflict faded into the distance. 2 hawks led them deeper into the canyon, where horses waited in a hidden alcove. "I sent scouts to watch the pass," he explained. "When they reported Pike's men searching the mountains, I knew you would need help." "Thank you," Colton said with feeling. "We owe you our lives." The Apache nodded. "The debt between us is paid now, Colton Zachary. Your woman's claim, you found it." "We did," Josephine confirmed. "Everything my father described and more." "Good. The gold will bring many white men, but perhaps some will be honorable like your father." 2 hawks turned to Colton. "You will protect her?" "With my life," Colton replied without hesitation. They made camp that night deep within the canyon, with 2 hawks warriors standing guard at strategic points. For the first time since fleeing Silverstone, Josephine felt truly safe. As they sat by the fire, she examined the contents of her reticule, the deed, maps and pouch of gold still intact despite their ordeal. "Pike won't give up," Colton warned. "Even after today's defeat, he'll keep coming." "Let him try," Josephine replied with newfound determination. "I won't be driven away from what's rightfully mine." Colton studied her with admiration. "You're a remarkable woman, Josephine Owens." "I'm a stubborn woman," she corrected with a smile. "My father always said it would either be my greatest strength or my downfall." "In this case, I'd say it's your strength." Colton's voice softened. "When I first found you bound in that saloon room, I thought I was rescuing a frightened Eastern lady out of her depth. I couldn't have been more wrong." "I was frightened," Josephine admitted. "I still am. But fear doesn't have to stop you from doing what's necessary." 2 hawks approached their fire. "My scouts report Pike's men have withdrawn to Silverstone. The way to Fort Bowie is clear, but you should leave at first light." After the Apache leader left them to check on his warriors, Colton turned to Josephine with a serious expression. "When we reach Fort Bowie, things will change. The army will provide protection and the territorial officials will be involved. That's what we want, isn't it?" "Yes, but," Colton hesitated. Once your claim is secure and Pike is dealt with, you'll have choices to make about the mine, your future. Josephine sensed what he was struggling to say. And your place in that future. I'm not a mining engineer or a businessman, he said. Just a drifter who's good with a gun and tracking. Not much use once the danger's past. Is that what you think? Josephine moved closer, her green eyes reflecting the firelight. That I'll have no need for you once the claim is secure. It would be the sensible conclusion. Then you don't know me very well yet, Colton Zachary, she replied. Because sensible has never been how I approach important decisions. Before he could respond, she leaned forward and kissed him a gentle, questioning touch that quickly deepened as he pulled her closer. When they finally parted, Colton touched her cheek with a calloused hand. I should warn you, he said softly, I'm not the settling type. And I should warn you, she countered, that I can be very persuasive when I want something. His smile was slow and genuine. I'm beginning to see that. The next morning, they bid farewell to Two Hawks and his warriors. The Apache leader clasped Colton's forearm in the traditional manner, then surprised Josephine by doing the same with her. You have a strong spirit, he told her. Like the mountain lion, small but fierce. It will serve you well in the days to come. Their journey to Fort Bowie was uneventful. The military outpost, with its adobe walls and fluttering flag, was a welcome sight after their ordeal. The commanding officer, Major Harrington, received them with interest once Colton explained their situation. Pike's operations have been a thorn in our side for some time, the major said as they sat in his office. But without evidence of wrongdoing, our hands have been tied. We have evidence now, Josephine replied, placing her father's deed and the gold samples on his desk. He attempted to murder me for this claim, and he'll try again unless he's stopped. Major Harrington examined the documents carefully. This appears to be in order. I'll assign an escort to take you to Tucson immediately. The territorial governor needs to hear this firsthand. The following week passed in a whirlwind of activity. In Tucson, Josephine testified before the territorial governor and mining commission. Pike was charged with attempted murder, claim jumping, and a dozen other crimes. A warrant was issued for his arrest. While the legal machinery ground forward, Josephine and Colton began making plans for developing the mine. With the governor's backing, they secured financing from a Tucson bank and began purchasing equipment and hiring workers. It's really happening, Josephine marveled one evening as they reviewed construction plans for the mining camp. In 6 months, we'll have a full operation underway. And Pike? Colton asked. The outlaw had disappeared following the issuance of the warrant, presumably fleeing into Mexico. He can't harm us now, Josephine said confidently, not with the entire territory aware of his crimes. Colton wasn't as certain, but he kept his concerns to himself. Instead, he focused on the security arrangements for the mining camp, hiring former cavalry scouts and trustworthy frontiersmen to protect the operation. By the time they returned to Confluence Valley, a month later, leading a wagon train of supplies and workers, the transformation had already begun. The first buildings of what would become Owensville were taking shape: bunkhouses, a mess hall, and a say office. It's not much to look at yet, Josephine said as they stood on a rise overlooking the activity. But it will be. Colton slipped an arm around her waist. Your father would be proud. Yes, she agreed, leaning against him, though he might be surprised by some of my choices. Oh, she turned to face him, eyes twinkling. Well, he always hoped I'd marry a Boston banker or lawyer. I don't think former bounty hunter was on his list of suitable professions. Colton raised an eyebrow. Is that a proposal, Miss Owens? It might be, Mr. Zachary, she replied with a smile. If you're inclined to accept. Instead of answering immediately, Colton reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object, a gold ring, crudely fashioned but undeniably beautiful. The band was twisted into an intricate pattern, with a small nugget of raw gold as its centerpiece. "I made this," he said, suddenly looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "From the first gold we panned together. I'm not much for fancy words, Josephine, but I know I don't want to drift anymore. Not when I've found someone worth staying for." Josephine's eyes filled with tears as he slipped the ring onto her finger. "It's perfect," she whispered, admiring how the gold caught the light. "And yes, Colton Zachary, I will marry you." Their wedding took place 3 months later in the newly constructed church in Owensville. The settlement had grown rapidly as news of the rich gold deposits spread throughout the territory. What had begun as a mining camp was quickly becoming a proper town, with merchants, a school, and families settling in the once empty valley. Madame Louise surprised them by attending the ceremony, having sold the $silver saloon and invested in a hotel in the new town. "I know an opportunity when I see one," she told Josephine with a wink. "And this town needed a decent hotel." 2 Hawks and Morning Star came down from the mountains for the celebration, bringing gifts of beautifully tanned deerskin and turquoise jewelry. Though they declined to enter the church, they participated in the feast that followed, their presence a testament to the unusual friendship that had formed. As the sun set on their wedding day, Colton led Josephine away from the festivities to the small house they had built overlooking the confluence. Inside, a fire burned welcomingly in the stone hearth, and windows framed the spectacular view of the valley. "Welcome home, Mrs. Zachary," Colton said, lifting her over the threshold. Josephine laughed as he set her down. "I never imagined when I came west that I'd find not only my father's gold but something far more valuable." "And what's that?" he asked, drawing her close. "A partner," she replied, reaching up to touch his face. "Someone who sees me as I am and values my strength rather than finding it unsuitable for a lady." "Nothing about you is unsuitable," Colton murmured against her lips. "Especially not your strength. It's what I admire most." As they stood together in their new home, the sound of celebration drifting up from the town below, Josephine reflected on the journey that had brought them here from that terrifying moment bound and gagged in a saloon room to this new beginning. "What are you thinking?" Colton asked, noting her thoughtful expression. "That sometimes the worst moments lead to the best outcomes," she replied. "If Pike hadn't kidnapped me, you might never have found me." "I would have found you eventually," Colton said with certainty. "Some things are meant to be." In the years that followed, Owensville grew into a prosperous mining town, known throughout the territory for its fair practices and good governance. Josephine's dream of creating civilization amid the wilderness took shape as she established a hospital, expanded the school, and even founded a small college focused on mining engineering and geology. Colton found his place not only as head of security for the mining operation, but as a respected member of the community. His knowledge of the land and its peoples made him an invaluable liaison with the Apache and other tribes, helping to forge peaceful relations in a region often torn by conflict. Pike was eventually captured trying to cross back into the territory. His trial and conviction for attempted murder brought final closure to the danger that had once threatened everything Josephine and Colton were building. 5 years after their wedding, as they stood on the porch of their home watching their twin daughters play in the garden, Josephine leaned against Colton's shoulder. "You ever miss it?" she asked. "The freedom of drifting, answering to no one." Colton considered the question as he watched 3-year-old Emily and Elizabeth chase butterflies through the flowers. "Sometimes I miss the quiet," he admitted with a smile. but never the loneliness. And you don't regret settling down with a stubborn woman who dragged you into becoming a respectable citizen, he laughed, turning to embrace her. The only thing I regret is not finding you sooner. As the sun set over Confluence Valley, painting the sky in brilliant golds and reds, Josephine thought of her father and the legacy he had unknowingly left her, not just the gold that had built their town, but the courage to venture into the unknown and the wisdom to recognize true value when she found it. In Colton's arms, surrounded by the life they had created together, she knew she had discovered a treasure far more precious than gold, a love forged in danger and adversity, strong enough to build a future neither of them could have imagined alone. And it had all begun in a saloon room, where a bound and gagged Eastern lady waited for a hero, and found instead a partner for life.